Today's daf is daf Chaf Aleph. And we'll start here on the bottom of Chaf Amid Beis, review a little bit of what we did yesterday. And we had a statement of Ze'iri with regard to the status of an animal after you shechted the rove of the simonim plus rove basar, and it was nishbara mafrekes, and he broke the neck bone of the animal. And Ze'iri claims that in such a case, the animal is already a nevela and it's metame tumas nevela, so that shchita would not be mitayr because shchita is only mitayr midei treifa. And Rava raised the kasha on Ze'iri, and he said, well, according to your premise, how can you do malika? Malika, l'chora, would require that when you come in from the oref with your fingernail, you break the neck bone, and then you go ahead and you cut through rov basar. And at that point, the animal, according to Ziri, is considered dead, and therefore Rava, exclaims with a question, "Ki v'chi mesa omed umolik." Can you achieve malika after the animal is dead already? I mean, the whole idea of malika as a kind of substitute for shechita is to do malika on a live animal, not on a dead animal. And to that, Abai said, well, what about olas ha'of? Olas ha'of, as opposed to chatas ha'of, requires malika of shnei simonim. And once you do the malika on shnei simonim, the animal is obviously dead. So how do you achieve malika on a dead animal? And Rava seems to answer that the idea of the second simon in the case of olas ha'of, that's because of a separate mitzvah called havdalah, that you have to separate the head of the bird from the body of the bird. And at that point, in the Shakavitaria, as you'll see here, 4 lines before the end of Chaf Amid Beis, the Gemara asks, "Ar nami kol ma'akev b'shchita ma'akev b'avdolah chol she'enu ma'akev b'shchita ma'akev be'avdolah?" And according to the Chachamim, we'll see that Rabbi Lazar disagrees, but according to the Shittas Chachamim, in the case of Malika, in an Olas Ha'of, the Rabbanan require that the Malika be done in such a way that it completely cuts through 2 Simonim. So at that point, Rava sort of reformulated his principle. Ela ema kol sheyeshno b'shchita yeshno b'avdolah, kol she'ena b'shchita ena b'avdolah. And although Rava was able to defend the Chachamim's requirement to cut both Simonim entirely in the case of Olas Ha'of, but we still have a problem because in the case of Malika, there's going to be already a pronouncement, so to speak, of the death of the bird. And that's what the Gemara says here on the top of Chaf Aleph, our daf for today. Omar Rava, Ema v'chenu ose chotech shidro mafrekes below rov basar. That the malika should not include rov basar, but rather just the breaking of the neck bone, which is called shidra umafreke, chotech mafrekes, but the animal is still alive, even according to Ze'iri, because he did not cut off rov basar. Kisolik Rabbi Zera came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Ashkeche, he met Rabbi Ami, the Yosef Kamalu Ashmaita. And in fact, the Amora of Ami was saying over and teaching that which we learned from Zeiri. Amalei, so Reb Zera says, Zeira says to Rav Ami, B'chi Mesa Omeku Molik, I'm going to challenge you, which really he's challenging himself. It's already dead, and you're still doing Molika on a dead bird. Ishtomem Kishachada, Rav Ami at that point was completely confused, and Amalei, so Reb Zera answered his own question, Emakachu Ose Chotech Shidra Mafrekas below Rov Basar. And Tanya Nami Hachim, we learned that way in the Brisa, case in Molkim Chatas Ha'ov, Chotech Shidra Umafrekes below Rov Basar. So over and over again, we have to emphasize below Rov Basar, so that the bird is still alive. Ach Magil Leveshet Olakana. He Gil Leveshet Olakana. And now we're talking about Chatas Ha'of, which only requires Malik of one of the two Simanim. So it's either the Veshet or the Kana. Right? The Veshet is for the food to go down. That's called the esophagus. And the Kana we've seen many times is for breathing, for air to go up and down the pipe, which is called the trachea. Chotech Siman Echad Orubo V'rov Basar Imo. So according to this brisa, it's quite clear that in a malik of a chatas ha'of, all you need is one siman. However, if it's olas ha'of, the brisa continues, shnayim, you have to malik on both simanim, the kana and the veshet, and that's in order to achieve the mitzvah of havdolah, o rov shnayim. Now, this addition of O Rov Shnayim would reflect the Shita Rabbi Lazar. Okay, I don't see that he points this out here, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay. Here it is. Mani, here, the Gemara itself. Who would allow you and validate the Malika on Rov Shnayim? And yet, on the other hand, it says Shnayim. He has two options. Shnayim means completely cut the two simanim, and that's not going to fit in with Rabbi Lazar. And on the other hand, it says Rov, which can't fit into the Rabbanan. So therefore, the Gemara immediately asks Mari, who's the author of this brisa? Rabbanan, according to Rabbanan Amri Shnayim Dafka. So Rov Shnayim is not enough. You have to completely sever the two pipes. And Ki Rabbi Lazar, Reb Shimon, Ha'amar Rov Shnayim, and you're not allowed to cut complete, entirely. Rabbi Lazar, Reb Shimon holds that it's forbidden to sever the pipes completely. So how do we work out this price? So Ema, let's assume Shnayim l'Rabbanon and Rov Shnayim l'Rabbi Lazar, Reb Shimon. This is what's called in the Talmudic language litstadim katani. In other words, when you say A or B, you mean A according to so-and-so and B according to so-and-so. Ibais Ema, Havahar Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon. That even when it says Shnayim in the Brisa, which means entirely cut Shnayim, that could also be interpreted according to Rabbi Lazar. And what does Shnayim mean? Shedomim l'Shnayim. Meaning that if he does Rov Shnayim, that's considered like Shnayim. So the Brisa is really not giving you another option. You only have one option of Rov Shnayim, but the Brisa is giving you like a conceptual definition that Rov Shnayim is like Shnayim, because Rubo Kekulo. Om Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul Nishbar Mafrekes V'Rov Basar Imam Etami Ba'oel. So this reflects or is an additional application of Zeiri's principle, but he's applying it to a human being, and Nebuch, a human being, broke his neck bone and most of his flesh upon the the flesh on the neck bone. And then if anyone else is under a roof together with this person, then he contracts tumas ohel, because a mess is mitami bi ohel. And then the Gemara sort of goes on a digression here into Tanakh, because Eli HaKohen, who was the Kohen Gadol in Mishkan Shiloh, died when he fell off his chair and he broke his neck. When he found out the bad news that the Plishtim had taken away the Aron with the Luchos Habris. So V'im Tov, you'll ask me, also Maisa the Eli Mafrekes below Rov Basar Havi. Maybe we don't have any indication that when Eli broke his neck, that the greater part of his flesh around the neck was also disjointed, was cut, was severed, and yet Eli died from it. So you see that your solution to the problem, which we had earlier with Zairi, that maybe a malika in which you did not remove mo basar, you just were shover mafrekes, that the animal would survive. Well, why didn't Eli survive? He didn't rip apart rov basar. And the Gemara answers Zikna Shiny. The pasuk itself answers this question. Dichsiv vayhi kehaskiro, when somebody told Elia Cohen as Arnold Kim about the fact that the Ark of Hashem was taken captivity, then immediately vayipol me'al hakiseh achoranis, he fell backwards on his chair, and bi'ad yad hashar vatishova mafrak vayamos. But now, in addition to reporting that Elia Cohen broke his neck when he fell backwards, but the Tanakh adds a few words. Ki zoken ha'ish v'kaved, because the man was old and heavy. So you see that even without removing Rav Basar, a human being would die if he's old. Again, I don't know what age is old, that you have to figure it out. Even without, just because of Shviras Mafrekas. And the nafkamina is going to be that anyone in the oil there is Tomei Tumas Oil. Now the Gemara continues discussing situations in which a body, a human body in this case, but we'll soon see another case with an animal body, where something happened, something tragic happened, and the body is still what's called in Lashon Kodesh mefarkes, and it's still shaking around. But nevertheless, don't be fooled by that kind of response. I don't know what word you want to use, because it's dead. So therefore, Shmuel Bar Nachmani says in the name of Yochanan, Kra'o kedog, if a person, I guess, takes a knife and just like he was cutting a piece of fish, he murdered someone and slit him up down the middle, is mitami bi ohel, then he's considered dead. When cleaning fish, one slits its belly along the entire length of the fish. If a person was slit along his entire length, he's considered dead, even though his body is jerking. That's called mefarkes. However, this is not always the case. Was he slit in the front or in the back? Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak umigabo. We're talking only about a case where he was cut down his back. And now we go on to the animal. Amar Shmuel Asa Gisra. If he takes an animal, and again he splits it in two, nevela, it's considered dead. And here it's interesting, the Gemara doesn't qualify and say, oh, that's only because it got split in the back. Apparently, in the case of an animal, even if it was split in two in the front, it's considered dead, and it's metame tumas nevela. Omer Rabbi Lazar, nital ayerech v'chalol shala nikar nevela. If an animal, if they removed a thigh, for example, of an animal, there's now a cavity. I mean, you just look at the animal and you see that it has no leg, it has no thigh. It's nevela. Hechidami chol shala. What does it mean when it says nital yerech v'chol shala nikar? What does that mean? That the cavity is obvious. Amarava kol sheravutza v'nires chasera. Ravutza is when the animal crouches down and you could see that it's missing a limb. And once you've reached that level, you know that the animal is nevela, it's considered dead. He says here, when an animal crouches on its legs cannot be seen. Therefore, if the cavity is discernible even when the animal is crouching, that's proof positive that the entire limb was removed and the animal is nevela, even though it appears to be alive. Again, I don't understand when he says a limb. I mean, Rabbi Lazar is talking about yerech. I don't know, a limb, like what would be if the animal's the leg from the knee and down was removed? I don't know, would that make it into an avela? I doubt it. So I guess we're talking about the entire thigh of the animal was removed. And there's such a cavity that you could obviously see that the entire limb is missing. Tanan Hasam. Okay, now we're talking about the laws of shrotzim. Now, a dead sheretz is metame. And the Mishnah in Olo says that hutzu rosheim, that if you took the head of this creature, this sheretz, and you cut it off, then it's metame, meaning it's considered dead because of the decapitation. And afal pi shemafarkasin, even though this creeping creature is still jerking around, doesn't matter. Tmeim. And it's compared to kiznav haltor shemafarcheses. Like you take a lizard and you cut its tail and it starts, it starts jerking, but it's dead. The Gemara says, "My hutzu." How do you translate in the Mishnah Olos the word hutzu, which means it was cut off? And here we have a machlokas. Reish Lakish Omar hutzu mamish. In other words, the head was completely cut off. The veshet and the kana was completely cut off. Rav Asi Omar Rebbe, Ramani, in the name of Ramani, kehavdolas olas ha'of. So is that another opinion? I mean, havdolas olas ha'of also means hutzu mamish. Omale Rabbi Yirmiyah Rav Asi. I don't know how to interpret what you're saying. Are you saying Kavdalas Olas Of Rabbanon, which means that according to the Rabbanon Shita in an Olas Ha'of, you need a complete severance of both Simonim, V'lo Paglidu, and then you're not arguing with Reish Lakish, you're just formulating Reish Lakish's statement in different words. O Dilma, or did you perhaps mean Kavdalas also of Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon? And according to Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon, and this we mentioned already on the previous Amud, against the Chachamim, he holds that when it comes to the Malika of an Olas Of, we don't completely sever the two pipes, we only do the majority of the two pipes. And Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying in the Shita of Ramami against the Shita Reish Lakish that Hutzu doesn't necessarily mean it was severed completely, and therefore this sheretz is metame as if and declared dead, even if most of its head was decapitated. Amalei, so of Asi, who had brought this tradition in the name of Mani, he said, Kavdolas olas ha'of l'Rabbalos Reb Shimon upalginen. And we disagree with Reish Lakish. We hold that it doesn't have to be hutzu mamish, and it was completely cut off. But as long as rove of the simonim were cut, it's already considered a dead creeping creature. It's a dead sheret, sense metame. There's another transmission, and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omar, Hutzu Mamish, Rabbi Yossi Kavdolas, Olas Ha'of L'Rabbalos Reb Shimon, Berov Shnayim. You don't need Hutzu Mamish. It's already considered dead and it's Mitam Ba'oel if you severed most of the two pipes. My Rabbananu, my Rabbalos Reb Shimon. Where do we find the original brisa that presents and records this machlokes about whether you need complete severance of the two simonim in Olas Ha'of or it's enough to have rov? Tisanya, we learned in a brisa, the es hasheni yase ola kamishpat. So this is a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Hey with regard to a carbon ola v'yored, in which the financial situation of a person will determine what exactly will his chatas be comprised of. If he's very poor, he brings shnei Torah shnei b'nei Yonah. But if he's wealthy, then he brings as a chatos a keves. Or a gedi. If he's very destitute, then he only brings a carbon mincha. That's a carbon olivia. We've discussed this many times in the past. Okay, so that's what the pasuk says. Hasheni yasa ola kimishpat. So now we're talking about Dali Dalus, and I'm sorry, Dalus, and he's bringing one bird as a chatos and another bird as an ola. And what is kimishpat? Kimishpat chatos behema. Okay, so we're going to have a long discussion about what that means. If he was wealthy, he would have brought a chatos from a behema. Now, he's substituting these birds, the ola and the chatos, for the chatos of a behema. And therefore, kimishpat means that the laws that apply to a chatos behema now will apply to the olas ha'of or chatos ha'of. Okay, so in Mitzvah Shem and Amid Beis, we're going to see what those laws are. Ata omer k'mishpach chatos behemo eno el k'mishpach chatos ha'of. Maybe the pasuk is coming to compare olas ha'of to chatos ha'of, but both are birds, and not to a chatos that was brought by a wealthy person from a behema, and that's impossible. Why? Kishu omer v'hikrivo, right? Let's read the pasuk inside. It says, I'm reading from the Torah, or v'krivo akoin el hamizbeach u'molakes rosho v'hikter hamizbecho v'nimtza domo al kir hamizbeach. Okay, so that's at the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra. So vikrivo means bring it near. But again, the vav at the end of vikrivo means it, and the word it or the vav of vikrivo is a mute, it and not something else. Cholak hakosuv ben chatos ha'of liolas ha'of. So the Torah here is differentiating and contrasting the chatas ha'of and the olas ha'of. For example, the olas ha'of requires shnei simonim, whereas the chatas ha'of only requires one simon. So therefore, when the pasuk of Olav Yored says kamishpat, it cannot be comparing the two olos. The two ophos, because the Torah has this mid called vikrivo to contrast the two ophos. So therefore, mani mekayim kamishpat. So when the Torah in the parsha of Chatas Ha'of says kimishpat, it can't be kimishpat olas ha'of, because vikrivo separates and contrasts olas ha'of with Chatas Ha'of rather than equate them. Therefore, kimishpat Chatas behema. Okay, now we're going to have a whole list of halachos that apply to Chatas Ha'of in the context of, or derived from the equation to Chatas Behema.